Hello everyone, this is Magic Lover recording for the mtg Noob. Playing a little Commander, and just wanted to do a quick deck tech for those of you who are unfamiliar with the cards. I typically play a Ghave Guru of Spores deck. I love tokens and counters and abusing the synergies of other cards that do the same. It's a fun Commander, not the most powerful. Certainly, but definitely has its own synergy and has a couple of quick and easy combos with other cards that can get it out of control pretty quickly. First and foremost, the Commander, two very important abilities. Comes in with 5 +1/+1 counters. You can remove a counter to put a Saproling into play, and then sack a creature, put a +1 counter on target creature, both at instant speed. So you can do a lot of neat things like, for 2 mana, essentially create a chump blocker, and then after declaring blockers, kill it, put it back on, or put the token on other things. But you can really, essentially use creatures and +1 counters to your maximum ability and move them around at will. One thing of note, if you're playing against a heavy blue, mono blue deck, I almost never play this without mana open, so I'll never tap out to play him because he invariably gets fate sealed or control magicked, something to take him away. So you always want to be able to have 1 mana to sacrifice him, get him back in your command zone or in your graveyard if you want him there. But I almost always make sure I've got mana floating with him. Anyway, on to the cards that I play in this deck. So that's the Commander, starts off in your command zone. Creatures that I play, Risk the Redeemed, just great in this kind of a deck, being able to generate tokens, but then obviously his ultimate ability for 6 mana to double the amount of tokens you have. Each creature token you have, put a token that's a copy onto the battlefield. It's a very powerful ability, and that usually is what gets opponents to concede. If you have 5 or 6 creatures, copy them, and all of a sudden they're staring down a pretty good army. That can get the game out of reach for many opponents. Recent addition to the deck, Uvenwald Tracker. Great creature in terms of green not having a lot of removal, and this being a great damage removal. Doesn't tap the creature that you're fighting with, so it's a cheap, easy way to get one of your big guys to beat up on one of their guys, hopefully without Shroud, and take them out. I think a staple of just about any green Commander deck, Oracle, allows you to accelerate very quickly by digging quite deep. This in combination with Sylvan Library and Sensei's Divining Top is very powerful in terms of getting your lands onto the battlefield and being able to do more stuff quicker than your opponent. Hornet Queen, since green is pretty weak against flyers, this is a great utility creature. Creates 5 creatures, 4 tokens, so you can create a lot of tokens pretty quickly, but everything with Death Touch. So I've used this to chump out and kill flyers quite a bit and stall opponents' air games. Avenger Zendikar, perfect for this deck. Puts tokens into play and then puts +1 counters on the tokens, so you can do a lot of great shenanigans with getting lots of lands in play, doubling the plant tokens, and abusing the +1/+1 counters. Great creature for this. Michaeloth, Big Mike, very fun. Many times, just of note with this guy, I'll normally cast him and devour maybe 1 or 2 things. It's almost never right to devour most of your creatures just to go for a huge Michaeloth. Put 1, 2, 3, 4 counters on him, because obviously with Ghave you have ways to sack other things and get counters on him, but he becomes a huge target and is definitely a target for any removal that opponent's holding. But the last thing you want to do is make him a 14/14, sacrificing 5 creatures, and then have him control magicked away if you're tapped out. So just be aware of that. Genesis, great utility creature, allows for recursion, getting a lot of stuff back from your graveyard because your creatures will die. Eternal Witness, another utility, being able to get back things that are either discarded, killed, or otherwise in your graveyard. Scavenging Ooze, wonderful way to keep Mimeoplasm decks from getting crazy on you. Anything that's dredge-ish or from an opponent that is requiring graveyard, this is a great way to keep that in check. Jade Mage, decent cheap utility creature that has the ability to spit out lots of tokens. Again, in the anti-flyer department, Aquastrand, with being able to help in the air defense with target creatures getting reach. That's very helpful. Two multicolored green-whites that do a lot to build armies quickly: Juniper Ranger and Sigil Captain. The only difference here, Sigil Captain gives a little more of a bonus, but it's got to be a 1/1 creature, where Juniper doesn't care about the size of the creature, but it's only a +1 counter on that creature and this. Both are pretty high value tutor targets early on and help get an army out of control quickly. Mentor of the Meek, very nice card in this deck. Great card advantage in terms of having a cheap creature that, for the cost of 1 mana, every time a creature enters the battlefield, you can draw lots of cards. Geist Honored Monk, another thing that helps in the anti-flyer department, putting flyers into play, and then becomes a very large creature on its own with vigilance, which is nice. And of course, the big fatty Elish Norn, who is usually a one-sided wrath, and once he hits the field, either opponent has removal or typically dies quickly. Those are the creatures of the deck. Quickly, some of the sorceries, utility stuff. Worm Harvest, great way to use extra lands late in the game, putting 1/1 tokens into play. Parallel Evolution, just be careful. Sometimes you play against like an elf deck, and this will be your worst enemy because they may have more creatures than you, more tokens than you, but pretty helpful. Separating Symbiosis, same thing. Sprout Swarm, great way to generate lots of creatures quickly. Decree of Justice I play just because it's nice against blue decks, not being typically they don't play Stifle, so or Stifle effects, so the cycling can't be countered, which is nice. And Entreat the Angels, certainly if you can keep this on top of your library for when you want it, and then cast it for a bomb, it can end games quickly. 3 Planeswalkers I play. Elspeth Tarot, great for being able to destroy anything else on the battlefield if they've got you locked somehow, but generating tokens and gaining life, all very relevant. And Garruk Relentless, a wonderful way to kill a creature and then start tutoring, or put tokens out. And Garruk, a great mana accelerator, token generator. And I've used this overrun a couple times to end games, so that works as well. 2 Library Manipulation, Senseis and Sylvan, great for the deck. Sylvan because normally paying 4 life per card is something you can't do often, but in Commander, 40 life format, you can actually draw a few extra cards, especially if you've got some other life gain going on. Harmonize, one of the few pure draw cards in green, for 4 mana, 3 cards, not bad. 2 tutors, Green Sun and Cord. Green Sun, every creature is tutorable with Green Sun except for the 3 pure white ones. So just about everything is tutorable, and Court of Calling, usually much cheaper since you got a lot of creatures, and that Convoke comes in pretty handy, letting you tap your creatures essentially for mana to cast it. Spawning Pit's very handy. A no mana instant speed sack a creature, so it allows you to tap out for Ghave if you don't have mana open, because you can always sack it to Spawning Pit if you need to, so that the opponent can't get a hold of it. Life from the Loan. I typically take this out in multiplayer, but in playing 1v1, I'll keep it in just because if you're Gaia's Cradle or Oran Reef, the Vastwood gets wastelanded, strip mined. You do want a way to get it back. It is pretty handy. Also, Life from the Loan and Worm Harvest is a pretty nasty combo once you got a few lands in the graveyard to just start generating a pretty large army. In terms of removal and utility, Seed Spark, pretty handy in the deck. Forecasting cost over Naturalize, well worth it to be able to get the extra creatures. Oblivion Ring, decent removal. Go for the Throat, pretty handy. Deathwind, I know this is a typically weak card. I like it because this deck generates lots of mana, since you're typically trying to do anything you can to get Cradle on the board. And it's -1, so anything that's regenerating, anything that, can prevent damage, it's nice to be able to kill it and drop it. Also, I've done it for 3 or 4 just to turn the tide on something in combat, and even if I can't kill it outright, just make it weak enough for one of my other creatures to finish off. Putrefy and Mortify, great utility. Kill a creature or an artifact creature or enchantment. 1 Sweeper for Phyrexian Rebirth. I play this over Wrath of God or anything else just because it generates a token, which is pretty handy. And Contagion Engine, that's great against Edric Spymaster type decks that play lots of little creatures. You can blow them out, or elves. You can blow them out pretty quickly. In terms of the mana base, nothing too complicated. Couple multis, the duels, the doubles, a couple fetches. Bojuka Bog's pretty important here, being able to, go for it at instant speed with crop rotation, getting people's graveyards away. But typically you're using your mana fetching abilities to get either Oran Reef, which is great with Ghave for creating armies quickly, or most likely Gaea's Cradle, which allows you to just do obscene things and generate all the mana you want. So typically those are the lands you're going to get. Of note in this deck, Gavony Township, great card for building up, +1/+1 counters on your whole army. Maze of Ith for stalling out some big fatty. Vault of the Archangel, don't activate it many times, but it's wonderful if you're on the defensive and you have a few creatures to be able to give them all Death Touch and hold them off if they've got a superior army. Vitu-Ghazi, just if you got extra mana, which you usually don't, but if you got extra mana and want to start pumping out Saproings, it's pretty handy. One of the more important legendary lands, Volrust Stronghold, to be able to recur your dead creatures. So many times, if I've cast Ghave a few times out of the command zone, he's getting pretty expensive. I'll actually let him go to the graveyard, put him back on top of my library, get him in my hand, because from your hand he's always his normal casting cost. 1 main land in here, besides the Dryad Arbor, Stirring Wildwood, just because it's got reach, and it's a pretty fat body for the mana cost. The cycling lands, you do usually want to cycle these unless you're short on mana, to get these into your graveyard for Worm Harvest or Life in the Loam. Fair amount of basics. The only tricky mana part to this deck is you do want triple white for Entreat, and you also want triple black for Grave Pact. Without Grave Pact in here, I probably would have 1 less or 2 less basic swaps, but Grave Pact's a very powerful card in combination with Ghave to be able to really keep an opponent's board under control. You can make them sack, 3-4 creatures a turn if you play it right. In terms of acceleration, back to lands, Explosive Vegetation gets 2 on the board, Cultivate 1 in your hand, 1 on the board, Rampant Growth 1 on the board. This 3 signets, the 3 on-color signets, Soul Ring, kind of mandatory unless you're playing French ban list, and then the 2 mana tutors. And then the utility enchantments. Necrogenesis, good utility, cheap just for being able to eat their creatures and yours if you need to get more tokens in play. This is good recovery after a board sweep or someone Wrath of Gods you can eat yours and theirs and have an army the next turn. Parallel Lives, pretty solid. Just doubles the amount of tokens come into play. Glare Subdual, very great card for this kind of deck. You can just tap down, again, you hate hexproof creatures, but you can tap down opponents' armies pretty quickly because you'll almost always have more creatures than they will. Grave Pact, basically with Ghave in play, reads, for 2 mana, make your opponent sack a creature, Diabolic Edict your creature, your opponent. So not a bad source of removal. Doubling Season and Cathar's Crusade are pretty much win conditions for the deck. If you land either one of these, that's usually game over. Doubling Season, doubling the number of tokens and creatures, and I'm sorry, tokens and creatures that and 1/1/1 counters that get onto your guys. Very powerful effect. And then Cathar's Crusade, which is just amazing with Ghave in terms of generating a very large army very quickly. I played a recent game where I had, maybe 14 creatures, all 13, 12, 11 toughness in a turn. So if you get this out, pretty much it's going to be a good game unless they can deal with it or have a sweeper very quickly. So this is the deck. Looking forward to playing some games. I'll try and mix it up, play some 1v1 as well as some multiplayer. But certainly if you have any questions on it, feel free to post in the comments and we can address it. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.